Hello, everyone. Good morning, good day, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Wherever you are, I hope you're having a wonderful time. I hope your semester is going well enough. I hope things aren't too stressful with distance learning. I hope it's all right. Overall, we're doing quite all right. We've got a few things to talk about. Today we've got an interesting topic. Well, it's interesting to me at least. It should be interesting to you because it's something that's going to relate more directly to your teaching and in life in general. So I think it could be useful for you. Let's get right into it. Alrighty, let's see about this. So this week, we're talking about knowing your audience, who you are talking to. But first, let's talk a bit about some different things. We have our discussion board. Just to remind, this past week, I asked you to watch the Kennedy speech one time or two times at most, and to briefly summarize what the core concept was. What was the thesis of his speech? Why was he doing it? And then choose one of the making a point methods that you liked and explaining why. Seeing at what the answers are coming in so far, they're quite there's some very nice thoughts, and it's one of those nice things to see that students are active and actually paying attention to. So that is a nice thing to see. I have to admit, it's a bit depressing for me as an American, because back then in the 1960s, America was well, obviously it was a younger country, but its rhetoric, its words was much more positive and forward thinking. He mentions it. Kennedy mentions that in the speech, that when countries stop looking forward and look backwards to their own history, then that it creates a cycle of destruction. And he was trying to argue and say that we need to look forward. We need to build better futures. And that's why it's interesting contrast to some of the words and language that we see in other times and by other people. We have your cut out the fluff assignment as well. Some of you have already submitted that. That is fantastic. It shouldn't take too long, as in if you're spending more than, in total, if you spend more than 1 hour on it, then something's wrong. And you're either trying too hard or there's a critical misunderstanding. So don't spend too much time. I'm trying not to stress you out too much, but I do want you to have some stress. I do want you to work. So it is something we want to do. Speaking of which, of stress, don't try to do everything at 11 p.m. on Sunday. That is when you'll get a lot of stress. Try to space out your assignments, your work, so you're doing a little bit of work throughout the entire time instead of all the work at the last minute. Then you might run out of time. Some of last week, some of the especially the other classes, students were submitting their assignments and their class discussion notes at 11:59 p.m. and that's like literally the last minute. So they were cutting it close. You got to be careful. So just try to do things ahead of time when you can. Just when you can. All right. I know we're all young adults, mostly. I don't know your ages, though, but I can assume your ages. So it goes with that. So this week, we're going to talk about knowing your audience, who your audience is, and how to talk to them, and how we adjust our speech, adjust our voices, and adjust almost everything depending on who we are talking to. This is a very natural human tendency. We don't talk the same way to our parents as we do to our friends. We don't talk the same way to our grandparents as we do to little children. We change our voice and our way of speaking depending on who our audience is. And that's entirely natural. Now, it's time to start thinking about adjusting our voices beyond the natural and think about how we can prepare our voice, prepare our language for that. So, part of when we address an audience is showing them that they have a problem and that you have a solution to that problem, or that that a problem exists and that they should care about that problem. So it is something that you see this a lot of the almost every speech, almost every protest, almost everything shows it's about a problem of some sort. Let me think here. On August 15th, there was a big old protest down in Gwanghwamun, and they're going to try again on Gaechunjeol. And they're not going there because they're happy and have zero problems in their lives. They're going there because there's a problem, what they think is a problem, and they're trying to convince the rest of Korea that they also have that problem, that we all have the same problem, and we need to fix it together. The methods of problem solving might differ, but it has that. So it's something when we talk about your audience, if you're trying to convince that let's say, people in their 30s versus people in their 50s versus people in their teens about what the problems are, you're going to have to approach it in different ways because they have different mindsets, different life experiences, and different ideas about the future. For a personal example, my grandfather, my mother's father, he is 100 years old. And so when he thinks about the future, he is in, this sounds very macabre, but it's true. He's not expecting to live long. He's expecting to, he is prepared spiritually, mentally. He's prepared to die every day because he's 100. He's ready for it. But he's been ready for it for 20 years. He didn't expect to live past 80. And so that's affected him and his outlook on life. He's not negative. He's not overly negative, but he is overly realistic about things. And so his outlook on life is very different than his great-grandchildren, who are what now? Some of them are well, I guess now they're about 20 years old. Very different outlooks on that. So when we think about our audience, there's a lot of different facets of it. Some of them are quite obvious, and some of them are not quite obvious. Some like socioeconomic level. How much money do they have? So people, and this also goes together with education level. How much education have they received? This isn't intelligence level. It's just how much formal schooling have they received, and then also what type of schools have they did they go to. So socioeconomic level. If these are people who live in, well, for example, like Gangnam-gu or Seocho-gu or just north of Itaewon, the real rich area, versus people who live in let's say Toseongmyeon in Gosan, north of Sokcho, they're going to speak differently, and they're going to have very different life experiences. And if you're going to teach kids in Gangnam, it's going to be different than teaching kids in Gosan. They're both kids, the same age, same nationality, but they have different life experiences and different resources as well. And then also nationality. This plays a lot with culture as well. Koreans are different from Chinese, are different from Japanese, are different from Filipinos, are different from Indonesians, are different from Taiwanese, and different from Malaysians, different from Borneans, different from countries that have developed their own cultures, and that requires us to be aware of those differences. Even now, this just came up. A lot of non-Koreans and non-East Asians, they're not really aware of how much pain, how much a painful history Japan and other countries have. They're surfacely aware of it, but they're not really deeply aware of how far down that pain and hatred can go. There was that Filipina YouTuber. She had a tattoo on her arm of her heart and had the rising sun motif from the Japanese flag behind it. And Koreans were upset. Not all Koreans, but some Koreans were. And some goober idiots kept attacking her, and that's not nice either. But Philippine history of Japan was just from 1941 to 1945. Because remember, Japan invaded the Philippines and conquered it and used its people as slave labor as well. But it was a much shorter time than they had in Korea. So even though that nationality plays into it and relating to its experiences, the rising sun flag, using that motif, that imagery in Korea, is a very different thing than using it in Canada. You'll get a very different reaction. Another example, something that's more mundane to you. Does it? I'll think of this. Would it bother you if I were to wear a hanbok? I'm going to wear one in a couple of weeks for my wedding, but does it bother you? Does it upset you? Probably. Just I can't get your immediate answer. Probably not. Non-Koreans wearing hanboks doesn't bother you. It's probably nice as long as they're not doing anything stupid in it. But that's true for anything. In America, though, some people get very angry when people outside of the cultural group wear that group's traditional clothing. They call it cultural appropriation. So Americans would be upset by, not all Americans obviously, but certain people in America and Canada would be upset by my wedding photos. I'd be stealing Korean culture. But Koreans, most probably, in my experience, 0%, would be upset by that. They wouldn't care, or they think it'd be nice. So the same act can be a nice thing, or a mundane, neutral thing, or an offensive thing, depending on the nationality. So it's something that when you're talking to certain people, to be aware of. And when you're teaching different students, if that event arises, to be aware of. All right. Excuse me. Also, age ranges, of course. Now, you're going to be teaching up elementary school students. So, obviously, a first grader is very different than a sixth grader. So, and they're very sensitive about ages. And also, they do act differently as well. So, with young children, this is a very obvious thing that you're going to speak to them differently and treat them differently and use different words. Affiliations. This can be professional institutes. You're going to talk to doctors and engineers differently than you do to teachers. They're both professionals. They're all professional groups, but they use different words and they have different ideas about how things should be. We get into other interesting things: gender, ethnicity, religion, disability, other areas where equality issues may be important. It comes into it. This might be just in your word choice, but it is something, especially in English, that nowadays, in the past 4 or 5 years, people have become very, very sensitive to gendered language in English. And so it's something to be aware of, that when you are speaking English, that you might have a better reaction if you were to use certain words or other certain words. We can get more into that later, but the language has been changing quite a bit in the past 4 years. And so I'm 36 years old, so I'm already too old to change, so to speak. And so but I'll try to help you along there. Family circumstances, marital status of the parents, children, grandchildren. Something I found out a lot about when teaching the children in rural Gangwon province is that a lot of not a lot, but a good number of students in the very rural areas didn't live with their parents. They lived with their grandparents. Parents had to work somewhere else or weren't in their lives at the moment, and so the grandparents or other family were taking care of them. So using such what would normally be an innocuous, innocent subject as, what does your mommy and daddy do? Well, the kids can't answer it, and we don't need to poke that bear. Also, then we get into smaller audiences, psychological profiles, just their personality. I have in one-on-one classes with more executive level students, and so they are the people in charge of their departments. They have hundreds of people under them that they have to manage, and they have to be the great man, so to speak. So having to provide correction to them and how fit into their personality, that is something you need to be aware of when you're dealing with eccentric personalities or powerful personalities, as it were. And lastly, and this helps with in Korea, power and status and being aware of that. This is something I had to learn more. I had to learn more than you would have to, but how sensitive people are about their status being acknowledged and respected. So it's something important for that to be aware of. In Kennedy's speech, you did see this, though. The first words he said, he acknowledged the important people. And who was the first person? There were a lot of important people there. There were obviously the President of the United States, the Vice President of the United States was there, the Governor of Texas was there, Senators of Texas, the Congressional Representatives of Texas, the Mayor of Texas was there. There were thousands of students there. There were hundreds of scientists and professors and all these other people, very important, very educated people there. And so President Kennedy had to acknowledge these important people because their status demanded that polite acknowledgement, and that's usually how it goes. But his very first person that he acknowledged was a president, and that was the president of the University of Rice. And so he acknowledged the president first as the host of the event, and then he acknowledged, in descending order, the individuals of most importance, then the groups of people, and then finally the general audience. So this is something that's very sensitive in Korea, but it exists entirely in English as well, in American culture. Don't think just because it's very, very important in Korea that it is the exact opposite in America or other countries. It does exist. It's just not the same. Then you're also knowing your audience, especially with students, their first language. In what language do they think in? This is quite important. Then their preferred learning styles as students, their likely attention span. Are 8-year-old kids going to be able to sit and listen to you talk for 2 hours? No. Are 20-year-old students, adults, able to sit and listen to you talk for 2 hours? No. You got to break things up. So be aware of how long your audience can sit and listen and watch you, how many minutes that can happen. Goodness. So that's about break management. And also background knowledge. How much do they know about what you're going to talk about? Do they know what's their levels? Is there English levels? Is there technical level? Example being, I wasn't there, but I was told about it by the students. There was a substitute teacher at my old elementary school. He was teaching first graders. So he's teaching first graders, and so he's like he was teaching too low at very low level. And it's like, my name, Bob. What? What? This phone. But the students in that class, 4 of them, 4 of the 10, had lived in America for 4 to 5 years. They spoke English almost natively, and the other students were very high level for first graders, as in they were far beyond that, and the students were very confused and angry, a little bit angry about how the teacher was treating them like they were stupid. And so the first grade students, elementary first grade students, were upset with the teacher because he was treating them like they were very low level, and teaching them incorrectly too, omitting articles and things. So it's important to try to figure out how much your audience knows before you actually start talking about things, who your audience is. If your audience is a group of, education majors, like you, for example, I think I can mention learning styles, methodology, lesson planning, things like that pretty easily. If the audience, for example, though, are, what shall we say? Well, we'll just say chemistry majors. Well, while they might have heard of lesson plannings and they can guess what it is, and they might be able to relate, or about learning styles or teaching methodologies or student counseling, but they won't know more details, and that's something that knowing how much knowledge, even if the audience is intelligent, they just don't have the knowledge of. And going more so with back to students, how much interest do they have in your subject? And how much are you going to have to stimulate their interest? Especially with children. A lot of kids hate English because it's not fun. It is no jam, as they say. So how can you make it jam? How can you make good jam, as it were? So you'll need to work with that, about being aware if you have a difficult subject to teach based on interest level, and how you can make it more interesting, how you can stimulate it. Also, students and audiences don't exist in a vacuum. They're not by themselves. They are affected by other things. So if something very big in the news happened, that's likely to affect them. One example being, 19 years ago, yesterday, September 11th, 2001, that was the terrorist attack in New York City. I was in high school at the time. I was a high school third-year student. And you were busy being babies? I think so. Were you born yet? Wait, were you born? Maybe. We're getting we're getting to that age. So that week of classes, we didn't really learn anything because our minds were on other things, on the more issues of this horrific event, and so we couldn't study. So things happen, and life happens, so be aware of that. And it doesn't have to be a national news or international news. It could just be in their own private lives. Just things aren't happy at home, and that affects their ability to focus on our lessons. So we need to be aware of what can happen. There are some different methods we can use to help know our audience better, to know our audience more. And the first one is do your homework. The more you know your audience, the better you can talk to them. And the sooner you know, the better you can prepare. unfortunately, like for example, for you, I don't know who you are. We've never met. I've never heard your voice. I don't know what interests you. I don't know those things. In class, I can get feels for things. So it makes things a bit more difficult to prepare lessons, so I have to make them more general and less focused. But I do know your nationality. I know your general age group. I know what you're studying. I know your majors. I know that. But I don't. So I can focus a little bit, but not very much. So if you can know who your audience is, who's in your audience, demographic information, that can help you focus your speech, focus your lesson. Also, this is quite important. It hasn't been my history. Where are you going to be working? What room are you going to be working with? Can you, for lessons, can you move the desks? Can you move things? Can you move things around? For several years, I taught on a mobile classroom on a bus. We traveled around Kangwon province. Now, we went to different schools every week. And that meant that we were teaching in different environments. And so we couldn't trust in lots of things. So some places, the environments, we taught in the cafeteria, very echoey rooms. Other places, we taught in the libraries. Other places, we never taught outside. But, we had to deal with different places. So we couldn't become too reliant on knowing where we would teach, things like that. So trying, if you can, to know who you're going to be talking to, who you're going to be teaching to, can help you out a lot. This is especially true, not so much with teaching, but with job interviews. In the future, if you need to interview for a job with different schools, if you're going with the private school route, or just if you decide for whatever reason you're going to work somewhere else, knowing more about more about the company or institution that you're wanting to work with can help. When I interviewed to work, well, I say here, but Chuncheon Gyode, I tried to learn about it because I didn't know much about what the school did and things like that. So learning about where you're trying to work before you work there is helpful. And it's not impressive, but it helps. It helps the audience think that you're not a complete idiot. So that helps as well. I know when I did job interviews for my old way back before, it did help that when the interviewees were able to know a few things or be able to ask clarifying questions about where we were, what we did, to show that they did some little bit amount of research and homework. It does help. Okay. Another cheat, so to speak. Not cheat. That's too harsh a word. But get personal. Can you engage with individual members of the audience and know them before your presentation? Who's organizing it? Who's the boss? Connecting with important people. People who knows everybody by name and who knows everyone by name. And then this gives legitimacy with the group. So if you make one friend in the audience, that helps makes friends with the whole group. So getting personal with your audience, with your students, knowing who they are, and especially the important people. This can have negative effects, though. Just a personal anecdote. There was, at my old job, this was at Gilly. One of the programs at Gilly is a teacher training, in-service training, as in English teachers who are current English teachers. They'd go to Gilly for 4 months at the time, and then they go to America, to Seattle at the time, for 2 months. And so Gilly would run the 4 months, and then the 2 months program in America was run by a company in America. And so we paid them money And so to help keep things, positive, the boss of that company would come to Gilly every so often and give speeches and just say hello and try to be personable. So I met him. He introduced me to him 5 times over 2 years. He did this. He tried to get personal and remember my name. He did all the good to meet you, everything, good to see you. If you come back home to America, you look us up. And the first time, I'm like, wow, that guy seems a really nice guy. And then the second time, the third time, the fourth time, the fifth time, he did the exact same thing. He didn't remember me at all. So something about this get personal. This is a great method, but it's also a dangerous method if you're not good at remembering who you've met before and who you haven't. But I understand entirely it can be difficult to remember who you've met if you meet lots of people. So it's something to be aware of, that if you use the get personal method and you use it again and again, and you meet the same person again and again, you might actually be destroying rapport. And so it is something to be aware of, that you need to be careful of, so to speak. All right. All right. Now, method 3, the old Milton Berle technique. Milton Berle, the old comedian. When it says the old comedian, I'm pretty sure he was dead before I was 10 years old. Like he was a comedian in the 1950s. A long time ago. So, but his method was what we're more talking about. When he met with a big audience, he would try different jokes, different material. So, because he would play to different audiences. So in the first few minutes, he'd do jokes of all kinds and see what worked and what didn't work. So if the audience liked nice, safe, just punny jokes, or topical humor, political humor, or the dark blue raunchiness, that's a sex joke. That's all it means. So he would see what the audience responded to, and then if the audience laughed at one kind of joke, but not at the other kind of joke, well, then he would shift the jokes. This required him to have lots of material, but it helped him personalize the experience for each appearance. So you might see, if Milton Berle was performing for a bunch of grandmothers and grandfathers, he'd be doing different jokes and a different show entirely than if he was doing a show for soldiers. He'd be doing a very different show. So you get a very different experience. For a lot of stand-up comedians, they have the one show they do for like 1 year, then they might change it. So you'd see 90% of the same jokes, which is, can still be funny and of live experience, but you see it once, you've seen it, and you're done. So, but being able to use this diverse method, diverse material, to try to see what the audience responds to and what it doesn't, it's a good way of trying things out. If you can't do your homework, if you can't do research on your audience, this is a way of doing it. So this is something I've done with students in classrooms. Obviously, I don't go too deep into things, but if I need to be high energy or medium energy or a bit lower energy, and also how I talk, depending on what the students respond to. So this is quite helpful. And this goes back into knowing your audience. You need to know how much your audience knows. And this is very important for being a teacher. You don't need to know everything, but you do need to know more than your students. You need to know 1% more than what your students know, at least. Now, for elementary school students, this is a lot easier. But people can't know everything. And anyone who says they don't respect a teacher because a teacher isn't an expert in their field is a liar and an idiot, because do you know who experts are in their fields? Not teachers, because they're spending time researching. They have to. Expert doctors have to read lots of journals of new materials and methods. And that's why we've invented computers and AI to help us learn more. And so it's really, but you do need to know more than your audience, but not too much more. If any of you have heard of Stephen Krashen, he's a grammatician, really important in the development of language acquisition and second language acquisition. He had the idea of I+1 for students to acquire, for learners rather, to acquire language, second language or third language naturally. It needs to be intelligibility plus 1. If the target language is too difficult, too high, our brains just shut off. We're not going to listen. We're not going to learn. But if there's enough there for us to understand, plus a little bit more, then we will understand. Then our brains will make the connections and put things together, and we'll learn and acquire that. That's why, let's take, for example, how do a lot of people learn English? Or, well, nowadays with Korean, a lot of people are got in Korean through K-pop, especially now the BTS things. And so through song, through music. And then they go on to Korean dramas, and then hopefully they get into Korea itself. So it starts with more shorter comprehensible language, and it works from there. And so, knowing what they know what your audience knows what your students know. Can you teach your students about? Well, let's start very basic level. Can you teach students the tag questions if they don't know how to ask questions to begin with? No. You have to learn how to crawl, then walk, then run. You have to start somewhere, and you need to know where in development your students are, where your audience is. And this is what this course is for first-year students. So a lot of this is very basic information. But sometimes, schedule things happen, and we get a fourth-year student in these classes, and they've already know a lot of this stuff because they've acquired it through their life experience. So it's important that your material is appropriate for your students' level and for their knowledge level. Number 5, this is a difficult one for teachers. Don't be a star. Don't be a prima donna. This is hard to not have an ego about things, but don't be a self-centered speaker. This is very hard for video because no one else talking. It's just me talking into the microphone. And I'm wearing a Hawaiian shirt and I'm super important. So it's more important to be interested in your subject than in yourself. You are not teaching yourself. You're teaching your subject. You are not presenting yourself. You're presenting your subject. Excuse me. So you need to be confident and authoritative, but not overconfident. So this is a fine line to walk on, a knife's edge, so to speak. So make sure that when we make lessons, when we make presentations, it's not about you or me. This isn't a video about me. It's about knowing your audience. When you make your lessons in the future, it's not a lesson about you. It's a lesson about giving directions or going to the store, things like that. So make sure that your presentations, your speeches, it's about your material, not about you. Pause. All right, everybody. Now, just want to remind everyone, we've got a few more things coming up. The Selling Something project is underway. Hopefully you're finding things to talk about, to introduce to me. Hot diggity dog. for your selling something project, your writing assignment, who is your audience? You know your audience. It's me! Yay. So, in brief detail, if there's a bit more questions, my name is John Harrison. I'm 36 years old. My birthday is December 26, 1983. I've lived in Seoul, in Seoul. I've lived in Yangyang. I lived in Gangneung. I've lived in Jincheon, and now I live in Hanam City. I've traveled extensively in Korea, but not everywhere. I used to travel around Korea watching baseball and soccer games, and it was very exciting and fun. I enjoy hiking. I enjoy cycling. I've ridden my bike around Korea a few times. I'm going to next week. I'm going to ride from Seoul, well, Incheon technically, from the Seoul to Busan bicycle route again. We'll see how that goes. Hopefully, it's not raining. We'll see how it goes. I enjoy eating, as all people should enjoy eating. I enjoy doing things. I studied history at university. I love history. I love mythology and cultural stories. They help explain quite a bit. And I just had an idea for another class. So, that's who your audience is. Your audience is me, a personal audience. You don't. So when you write your advertisements, for lack of a better word, your travel advertisements, you're writing for me. So you don't need to personalize and say, "Dear John Professor," or anything like that. You just know who you're writing for. This might help your writing skill, help focus things quite a bit. There's going to be a supplementary video because we need 15 minutes of lecture. It's quite a lot, to be honest. It's a long time. And according to OBS right now, I'm only at 42:45, and that's going to be cut down easily to 35 or 37 minutes when I edit things in. So I hope you're staying safe. I hope you're staying well. Make sure to stay on top of your homework. Don't put things off until the last moment. If you have questions, please ask, and we will take care of things, all right? Thank you very much. Have a good week, and goodbye.